Well, let me call this meeting of the Commission on Judicial Selection to order. And just for your information, what is being said and done here is on our webcast. It'll also be recorded for our website, so I just wanted to alert everybody to that. I'm David Beck. I've been asked by the Governor to serve as chair of this commission. And I first want to thank all of you for taking your very precious time to be willing to serve on this commission. My own view is that I think we have a historic opportunity to really do something to improve the way we select our judges in Texas. I think, as many of you here know, there have been efforts in the past to try to do this. I know that when John Hill was Chief Justice, John Hill, a Democrat, he tried it, did not work, despite his Herculean efforts. Subsequently, we had Chief Justice Tom Phillips, who was on our commission, a Republican. He tried it and it didn't work. So what I'm hopeful is that we'll all keep an open mind in trying to address what our mandate is according to the legislature. Every Chief Justice of the Texas Supreme Court since Chief Justice John Calvert has called for a change of our system, saying that it's got serious problems and we need to change. The problem is we can't develop a consensus as to what we ought to do to somehow change the system. So hopefully this commission, through our deliberations and discussions, can come up with a consensus that'll bring about some change and hopefully some good recommendations to the legislature. In the final analysis, it's going to be the legislature that's going to have to implement whatever it is we recommend, but at least this is a start. I want to add a footnote, and that is that in past efforts to try to bring about change, we have one difference today that the Chief Justice John Hill and Chief Justice Tom Phillips did not have. And that is we've got a governor that is very supportive of these efforts. He's very supportive of trying to bring about a change to improve the way we select our judges. And remember, he was a district judge. He was a Supreme Court justice. He was an attorney general. So he has kind of lived this system. So I think that we've got his support with whatever we come up with. So I think we need to bear that in mind. I think we've got as good a chance as anybody to bring about some change. As I said, what I ask is everybody to just keep an open mind in our discussions. I'm sure when we start out our deliberations, everybody's going to have some idea of the way these problems ought to be fixed. Just keep an open mind and listen to everybody. It's kind of like a jury. A jury starts out and you've got 5 people this way and 7 people this way, and they keep discussing the evidence, and finally they come down to a consensus and reach what is hopefully a good and reasonable result. So with that background, let me go around the table and ask everybody to introduce themselves, and if you'd like to introduce members of the staff, that's fine too. Megan's going to call the roll before we do that.
Mr. Beck?
Present.
Senator Birdwell?
He has an excused absence. He has to be in Washington, D.C. for a very important reason that has long since been planned, and we talked about it. He apologized, but he has an excused absence.
Senator Hinojosa?
Present.
Senator Huffman? Senator Nichols?
Here.
Representative Hunter?
Here.
Representative Landgraf? Representative Nares? Here. Representative Sherman?
Here.
Mr. Babcock?
Here.
Ms. Jamison? Here. Mr. Jefferson?
Here.
Ms. Liberato? Here. Mr. Oliveira?
Here.
And Mr. Phillips?
Here.
David, you want to go ahead and introduce members of the staff?
Good morning, everyone. My name is David Slayton. I'm the Administrative Director of the Office of Court Administration here. Thank you all for your service. Thank you, Mr. Beck. I've been working with Mr. Beck for several months now, preparing for this meeting. The one thing the legislation requires is that the Office of Court Administration provides staff and administrative support to you. So I just wanted to start off this morning by saying, if there's anything that you need along the way, either today or in the future, whether that just be logistical support, or if there's specific data or other types of information research that you all need, we are here to provide that support to you however we can. Megan will introduce herself more in a minute, but I have asked Megan to be the primary staff person assigned to this. Megan Lavoie has been with our office. She's the Director of Public Affairs and Special Counsel at OCA. She has previous experience working on this issue in the legislature. She was the general counsel for Senator Duncan when he was here and did some work on this. So she's got a lot of background in this area, so I asked her to work on this. And then you'll also meet Angela Garcia, who is behind Mr. Beck here. She is our Chief Data Officer at the Office of Court Administration, and so she has access to, I always tell when we may not have every data element, but if it exists about the judiciary, we have it. And so if there's something that along the way the commission or you personally as a commissioner are interested in, please let us know. We're happy to try to see if we have it, and if we don't have it, to try to find it. So those are going to be the two primary staff. I'm not sure I'll be at every one of your meetings. I'll do my best to be here as much as possible, but these will be your two primary contacts at OCA. We obviously have other staff that we could assist if we need to. The other thing I would urge that the legislature did provide some funding and some positions to OCA to assist the work of the commission. We have not filled those yet. And basically waiting to see kind of what you all are interested in. We may have a need to do that as more research is needed and other things, but we're kind of waiting to hear from you all about that. So if there's something specific that you have in mind, I hope you'll let us know, because we do have some funding that was provided to support the work of the commission as we go forward. So a little bit longer introduction, but I just wanted to make sure you all knew the staff that would be your primary liaisons, and certainly if there's anything you need from me or the agency, I hope you'll reach out to us. So with that, I'll pass it off to Senator.
Before you go forward, let me mention that David has said we have a budget. Let me tell you, it ain't much.
That's true.
Let's be aware of that. Okay, Senator, I'm sorry.
That's okay. Good morning. My name is Juan Hinojosa. I'm a state senator for the western part, District 20, western part of Delaware County. Runs up north to Brooks County, Falfurrias, Jim Wells, which is Alice and Fremont, and then east, Robstown and Corpus Christi. And quite frankly, I'm very glad and happy to be serving this commission. I think we all know what the problem is and the swing that takes, depending on which election cycle it is, but trying to find an answer and try to solve that dilemma, as Chairman Beck pointed out, we have to keep an open mind, and hopefully we'll be able to help make a better public policy for the judiciary. And with me, good morning, Senator.
Hi, good morning, Senator.
And we I have Daryl on the staff behind me, my chief of staff is Moreno. I think he was here, probably left. And at the end, I look forward to working with the commission and try to deal with some of the issues that are before us. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator.
Okay.
Representative Hunter?
Yeah, I'm Todd Hunter. I've been in the legislature since 1989. I've served with most of the people in here when they were younger. Yeah. I mean, Senator Hinojosa actually had hair when we started. And most of the chief justices I've worked with throughout the years. I do want to thank the League of Women Voters, because throughout the years, the League has really brought this to a high light. They focused. And my district is Nueces County, which is the eastern portion of Nueces, Corpus Christi, but I've represented most of the coastline, most of the counties throughout my service years. Angie Flores is basically the legislative assistant that's assigned, and she's with my office and works in the Capitol as well as at home. So we're glad to be here, and we appreciate the organization. We've worked with David Slayton in his office throughout the years as well. Glad to be with all of you.
Good morning. I'm Ina Mijares. I am a state representative from San Antonio, Texas. I represent House District 124, which is the west side of San Antonio. I'm very honored to be here, and I want to thank my colleague for allowing me to be a joint author on your bill. I've had an interest in this issue before I became a state representative, so I'm very honored to be here, and I look forward to getting to know all of you and work with you.
I'm Chip Babcock. The formal name is Charles L. Babcock, but I go by Chip. I'm a partner at Jackson Walker. I started my practice in Dallas after I clerked for a federal judge, and then I moved to Houston in 1991, still with Jackson Walker, where I practice litigation. For the last 20 years, in September, I've been chair of the Texas Supreme Court Advisory Committee, which has brushed up against some of these issues over the years. And I've been myself very interested in this. If I may, my personal view is that the current system has three problems. One is voter ignorance, particularly in big counties. I don't even know who I'm voting for, and it's hard to find out some of the judges that I'm voting for or against. And the second issue is the money, how much money is being raised, and that I think has to influence the confidence that the public has in our judiciary. And I know it influences some of my clients in New York and other parts of the country who don't understand this at all. And a lesser problem, but still nevertheless a big one, is that a judge, primarily a district judge, will make an unpopular ruling that will upset powerful lawyers, and they'll run a candidate against that judge in a primary. And to me, that is something that should be avoided. I don't know if we can fix that, but it's a very difficult and problem, and it happened to Judge Ginsburg in Dallas. He testified to that before the Judicial Conduct Commission I was representing him at the time. So that's the third problem I think we have to worry about.
Chief.
I'm Wallace Jefferson. I was a member of the Supreme Court of Texas from 2001 until 2013, and I was Chief Justice from 2004 until October 2013. I've been practicing appellate law since I left the court. The things that I see that are problematic about our system, and I witnessed as chief and as a lawyer, is that we've had outstanding, extraordinary judges, Democrats and Republicans, who have lost their seat in an election, not because they were incompetent or didn't work hard, but because during that election they had the wrong political party attached to their name, or because often in a primary they had the wrong name. It was confusing or ethnic sounding, and people have difficult times winning elections under those circumstances. And I've seen judges who have lost because they were unable to raise the kind of money that you need to raise to be competitive in a judicial election. And so my interest here is to see that we retain competent, extraordinary judges of either party or no party. I think party affiliation doesn't determine whether you are capable as a jurist. And I'm excited to see that this commission is going to look both at what has happened and what the potential remedies are. And I'm not bound to any single remedy, but I do think we should focus on what brings and keeps talented men and women to the bench.
Thank you, Chief. David?
I'm David Oliveira. I'm a practice law in South Texas, Brownstown town for over 30 years now. I've been also active in Democratic Party politics. I became interested in this issue when Martha's father championed it in the 80s, and my cousin Rene Oliveira, who was a state rep for many years, was also a big supporter of it. And I've been a litigator for 30-something years, and I've seen judges come and go, and I talked to my colleagues in Houston, and it's scary to think that every 4 years, or that if you run, that you're only going to have a job for 4 years, and I don't know any competent lawyers who are going to want to give up their practice to do something for 4 years, and so the system is clearly broke. I'm open to different plans. We've looked at a lot of plans. David asked me to serve on CJET with him, and we kind of got a running start on some of this, and we've looked at a lot of different options, and I'm excited about coming up with something that hopefully the legislature will pass and get to the voters.
Chief?
I'm Tom Phillips. I was Chief Justice from 1988 until Chief Justice Jefferson succeeded me when I left to teach and then practice law. I've been interested, I really became interested in this issue when I became a district judge. Started looking at my first campaign. Wade Fisher was president of the state bar in 1981, had asked me to serve on a committee, and then I was on John Hill's committee of 100. And going through that resume only shows that this is not a new issue, but it is an issue that, David, as I think you said, has always had some headwinds that may not be there now. There was a lawsuit challenging constitutionally the way we selected judges that slowed down any ability of the legislature to do this work for a good stretch of about 7 years in the 80s and 90s. Chief Justice Calvert left the Supreme Court to chair the Constitutional Revision Commission and got a change in judicial selection into the new state constitution, but then the governor came out against it, and all the articles were submitted separately to the people, and the judicial section got more votes than any other, but still lost. So this issue's been around a long time, maybe ever since Texas became a state, but I'm glad to be a continuing part of it, along with a lot of old faces and new faces. And I will keep an open mind, like you asked us to pledge to do.
I might add that on our stationery, we have Chief Justice Wallace Jefferson and Chief Justice Phillips have a parentheses after the name that says they're retired. Well, if they're retired, I'm dead. I don't know two harder working people in my life than those two.
Yeah, hi everybody, I'm Lynn Liberato. I'm a lawyer in Houston at the law firm of Haynes and Boone. I practice primarily appellate work, but I've got about half in the trial courts and half in the appellate courts. I'm a former president of the State Bar of Texas, and I had the opportunity to see, as a very young lawyer, the damage to my judges when I worked for 10 years at the First Court of Appeals in Houston. The one thing that strikes me above all else is what a great group this is, how honored I am to be a part of this with so many really impressive legislators and former judges and lawyers who I know well. So thank you, David.
Judge?
I'm Martha Hill Jameson. I am retired, so you may think I don't know. As has been indicated, I'm a second-year advocate on this issue. I also was a 20-year judge. I have run both in Democratic primaries and Republican primaries. Unlike these two gentlemen, I know what it's like to lose. So I have been swept into office just on my absolute merit. And I've been swept out by this craven. I also serve as the president of the American Judicature Society, which is an old-timey group that's looked at this issue and is perhaps the creator of what's called the Missouri Plan, and we'll discuss that. So I was able to go to meetings there and have people look at me as if I were some sort of alien being someone who had run as a judge on a partisan election. When you get outside the state and talk about that, folks don't quite understand why that's right.
Thank you, Martha. I'm Carl Sherman. I've spent most of my political career in local politics as a council member, mayor, and retired city manager now. I'm excited about being a part of this group. Certainly I feel as though I'm sort of an enigma, being a non-attorney here, I think with one other. So looking forward to learning.
That may be an asset.
Well, well, we'll see. I certainly think that we need to take out some of the partisan nature of this process if possible. I'm open-minded about this process as we look at it. I think that really it's what you learn after you know it all that counts. So really looking forward to getting to know more about your perspectives, your viewpoints, as I talk to our attorneys and our judges back in North Texas, where I represent District 109, which is Cereal, DeSoto, the suburbs of Dallas. I have with me today my communications director, Rita Cook. Watch what you say. She notates everything. Thank you.
I'm Robert Nichols, State Senator, East Texas, and Deep East Texas, and there is a difference. Staff in this will be Sydney Mitchell, and her last name will change before we finish our work. So I will tell you, unlike most of the people around the table, I'm not an attorney. You're not. I'm an engineer from a small town, and never really even thought about this issue until the Lieutenant Governor's office contacted me and asked me to be on it. I assured him I would keep an open mind, and I will. Engineers like to analyze things. We kind of break everything down in little boxes and try to put them back together, and I'm certainly going to do that. But I have worked on different judges' campaigns, and some of the comments that you made, it is almost unfair in a partisan situation where you've got somebody that's very qualified that not lose because of party affiliation, and they're dependent on campaign contributions. And then when they're making decisions, in the back of their mind, they got to be thinking, the kind of things y'all know that they might be thinking, because it's hard decisions to make. I did not really know anything about this issue, but since the Lieutenant Governor asked me to serve on it, we've been reading volumes of stuff. Go back, I didn't realize it had been such an issue for so long. We only researched back to World War II, it kind of stuff. If the last 60, 70 years ought to be enough. But we do have a problem. We want to make sure if we do a change, we don't want to make it a worse problem. I see these different kind of commissions that qualify people, and they're set up different ways. Y'all know, who's on those, who decides who's on those. How do you make that not the problem? And I've been working on state issues since '97 when Bush put me on the Transportation Commission. I represent 19 counties. I can assure you the kind of issues we have in the rural areas related to judges is different from the big urban areas. We do know where our district judges are. I mean, we see them at lunch. They're everywhere all the time. They know they have to be. So we know who they are, and we know who the good ones are and who the bad ones are. But in the urban areas, you may not. Now, the appeals courts are different where I live. We really don't know who they are. Now, I do, because they go to the kind of events I go to, but the average citizen that's voting does not. They're just strictly voting by party. And when they get down those lower bills, and that's always bothered me. I think most of y'all have relatives who all ask you, who do I vote for when it comes to the judges? They can't remember, they have to make a list. So qualifying, knowing who's qualified and who's not, to me on the appellate courts, on the appeals courts, is extremely important, because that's kind of like the teacher checking your homework. You need somebody, if you mess up at the lower courts, you need somebody that can straighten it out at the higher court. That's just kind of the way I see it. But I also know from practical experience in the legislature, I've been in the Senate since I was elected in 2006, that if you're going to pass something at the legislature, particularly if it's a constitutional amendment, you've got a 2/3 bar. So sitting around the table coming up with, like scholars, trying to do an entire system of the way it ought to be, that's one thing. But Senator Hinojosa and I, we have to explain it to the other members on walk to the elevator. We don't get a whole lot of time, so you've got to keep it simple. And it's better to, if you're going to try to make progress, assuming that's what we want to do, maybe take it a step at a time instead of trying to rewrite the whole thing. You may want to come up with a plan for the whole thing, but then choose a piece of it to work on first, which is the most important piece, and try to get that passed. If you can't pass that, you sure can't pass the whole thing. So it's going to be a real push if we come up with something. Simplify it, take a small bite, get it to the public. Because I've been talking to people in my district, not in speeches, but just one-on-ones with people I know real well about this issue, and they're horrified, literally horrified that they wouldn't get a chance to vote for their district judge. We know who they are. And so I'm not trying to reach any conclusions early, but I'm just trying to make some recommendations. You know, we need to be thinking about that. Anyway, that's kind of where I am. So I appreciate the opportunity to serve on this committee. Look forward to working with all of y'all.
Thank you, Senator.
Hi, yeah, I'm Joan Huffman. I'm the state senator. I represent parts of Harris, Fort Bend, and Brazoria County. I think I probably represent a few people in this room. And I'm a former judge, and I did go through the election process. I'm a Republican, and so I'm familiar with it from that angle. I'm now the chair of redistricting, but I've been the chair of state affairs for a couple of sessions, and we have studied this issue exhaustively, right, David? Yes. David Slayton, of course, if you don't know him, you'll come to know he's completely indispensable. But he, he's just a walking encyclopedia when it comes to these issues and state issues and judicial issues. And those of you who have worked with him, I know you agree with me. But we've massaged this issue a lot, and it all comes down, no big surprise, to politics. Like Robert said, we can be scholarly and look at the issues, look at other states, but it's very political here in Texas and how people feel about their right to, and they do believe it's a right, and I've come to learn this through the hearings, they do believe it's a right to vote for their judges. So when you start talking about taking away people's rights, I would just suggest you look at it that way, because I do believe that that's the way that the public feels about it. I like Robert's idea about taking things in steps, and I think we've already done that. And I think that the taking away the straight ticket party voting is going to have a major effect on how these judges, what the elections look like. I think it's speculation what it's going to look like, because I don't really know what the behavior is but it's going to change voting behavior. Who that benefits, whether it does help the judges, I think my first feeling is that less people are going to vote for judges because they're just going to be, I don't know who these people are. They're not going to take the time. Some people may start down the list thinking, I'm going to vote for all the Democrats, I'm going to vote for all the Republicans, I'm going to look for a name I recognize, I'm going to vote for all the women. We all know, why do people vote the way they do? So, but I think it's going to change behavior, and I think we'll learn a lot more after, this coming November. But it's an important issue. It's clearly affected the lives of many of our constituents. It's certainly worthy of our discussion. And again, anyone who's willing to take the time to look into this issue, I applaud you, because it's a tough one. And thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, for being willing to do this. The governor appreciates it.
Well, as I said, I think we have the opportunity to do something historic, but it's going to take a lot of hard work. It's going to be a heavy lift. But I honestly believe if we all work together and keep an open mind, we can get something done. I introduced myself earlier, David Beck. I'm with the firm of Beck, Redden in Houston. We're basically a litigation and appellate firm. I've been trying lawsuits for over 40 years. I was a senior partner at Fulbright and Jaworski, one of the big firms, and then started my own firm some years ago. I've tried cases before Democrat judges. I've tried them before Republican judges. It doesn't make any difference to me. All I want is a judge that will follow the law and call balls and strikes. And I think most lawyers really feel that way. If the lawyer doesn't feel that way, then that's on the lawyer. That's not on the judge. So I thought a good way, and we kind of morphed into this a little bit in the introductions, but obviously you can't solve a problem unless you agree on what the problem really is. So what I'd like to do is to begin the discussion by really talking about what's the problem. What's the problem with our current system? I'll give you my views. In my view, well, first of all, we're now only 6 states out of 50 that elect all of our judges. So it keeps getting fewer and fewer. We're one of 6. In my view, the problem is that we are losing good, experienced judges. I don't care whether they're Democrats or Republicans, and it has nothing to do with their performance. It depends on what the issue is at the top of the ticket, whether it's a governor's race, a senator's race, some other hot button issue, and judges down ballot just get swept in or swept out and has nothing to do with their performance. As Chief Justice Hecht told us recently in his State of the Judiciary, we lost nearly 440 experienced judges in November of 2018. 440. So I think that's one of the problems, is we're losing good experienced judges, and it has nothing to do with their performance. And when you lose a good judge who is well thought of on both sides of the docket, their judicial polls are extremely high, and they get swept out, you got to ask yourself, is something wrong here? And then the other thing, and it's already been alluded to, and that's money. I have to explain to clients all the time how it is that a judge can be out there trying to raise money as a Democrat or Republican, and then they win, and they take that hat off and are suddenly nonpartisan. It just, and maybe they are, but it just raises issues. You've been a judge before, and it just raises issues in the client's mind. When I get a call, and I'm on the defense side most of the time, when I get a call from an out-of-state client, Chip, you probably do too, and David, one of the first questions they ask is, do you know this judge? The second question is, how much did you contribute to the judge's last election campaign? And the third one is, how much did the other side's lawyer or client do? So it's obvious that they don't think very highly of our system. Now, I'm not saying that we ought to let out-of-staters decide our system, but money in the judicial system, in my view, is a real problem. And from the lawyer's perspective, when you get a call from a judge and says, will you be on my steering committee? Or will you contribute X dollars? And you've got a hearing the next Monday in that judge's court, what do you do? As a lawyer, you think, there's an ethical issue here. But on the other hand, if you tell the judge no, you've got to ask yourself, what effect does that have on my client? If you tell the judge yes, you start thinking, well, wait a minute, it doesn't look good, I guess is what I'm saying. So that's kind of my view. So why don't we just kind of go around and let's talk a little bit about what we think the problems are. And we may not agree on what the problems are, but let's at least begin to focus on the problems. Senator.
Quite frankly, think part of the big problem is partisan elections. I agree with you, Chairman Beck, 100%, that we have the swings and take out a lot of very good, experienced, competent judges. Just based on who's up at the top of the ticket. And it's a real problem because we get inexperienced people coming in. Some, quite frankly, are not competent to be judges, but they qualify and they qualify for the education we have in the Constitution. And the people that actually suffer are the public. And the attorneys have to put up with a lot of this issue that come up with having inexperienced judges. And to me, I think it doesn't make a difference whether you're Republican or Democrat. What you want is a judge that's experienced and is fair, and you said a while ago, calls strikes and balls, just to make sure that they apply the Constitution and the laws that we pass. But I don't like the present system. I think that partisanship is not good for our judiciary. I think I can identify what the problem is. I don't know to exactly what the solution is, but I know we have several alternatives to be able to change the system in a better way, not for the worse. And I think I've been to quite a few of these debates in the legislature. Senator Duncan had the legislation last time, when Chief Justice Hill tried to pass legislation to have a nonpartisan election. So I think it's very important we address the partisanship. Start there, and then from there move on to what would be better to have partisan elections. And I agree with you, Senator Hoffman, the issue about now we did away with straight party ticket voting. We don't know what impact that will have. But my take is it cuts both ways in terms of Democrats and Republicans. You're going to have people that are not willing to go down the list. And as informed as I am, I don't know other candidates in the judiciary that are running for office. I know the local ones in the rural areas, and you're right, Senator Nichols, are very different than, let's say, in Houston. You don't know most of the people running for judgeship. So you vote straight party ticket, that means you vote in their particular slate regardless of qualifications. It's a big issue, and I think also it's a big black eye on our judiciary that we need to address.
Anyone else? Yes, Representative.
For those that are not in the legislature, David, one thing you're going to need to do is to educate us on what is the constitutional bar and what is the statutory bar. So you know what Senator Nichols was saying, we have, like in the House, you have to have 100 votes. You have to have a 2/3. And so we need to figure out from this committee what is constitutional and what is not. I've been practicing law since '78. First of all, election of judges is under a different law than senators and state representatives. Most people don't know that. The campaign funding is different, and putting signs in people's yards as a judge is completely different. So we've got to understand as a group that when you change, you're dealing already with a different set of rules and regulations. First, as a practicing lawyer, if Ian and I go into a courtroom in a family law matter, why does it matter who's a Democrat or Republican? You're supposed to be an independent judge. Two, why is there a financial element for somebody that's ruling on your life? I mean, if the calls are who contributed, then we're not looking at the judiciary. We're looking at the political. And so throughout the years of 1989, and David, I've been in your area of the state all the way to the north, I think we need to look, as Senator Hinojosa said, whether we should have partisan elections or not for judges. I question why judges need to be a political party. Two, I think we need to look at calming the political contribution issues so that doesn't affect the electing public. Another concept, David, is as we go forward, do you do a complete system like Senator Nichols and Huffman said, or do you look at courts of appeals first? Do you look at certain branches of the judiciary first? So there's different approaches, but I would like us, let's look at this. I'm glad the governor said, I think this is the first time this issue's been pushed forward that he knows in modern times. And so I wanted to give you my perspective as half politician, half lawyer, and then the other good part is I've been a Democrat and I've been a Republican, but not the judiciary. And so I've been in all aspects of it. So the bottom line is, I think you've all got great comments, but I do think it's time to look at the system. Take a look.
Chief Justice Phillips.
Yes, there's several ancillary problems with our system, and we may or may not be able to get to all these. But one, we have the shortest judicial terms of any state in the United States. And we combine that with either the longest or the second longest political calendar. That is, you have to file in early December to take a job the next January. So it means that judges are wearing a political hat for a fairly significant part of each term. And I know my first year and a half on the Supreme Court, I spent more time writing thank you letters for money than I did writing opinions. And there's one or two of those I wouldn't mind having back.
Opinions or
letters? No, I'm glad none of the letters were wasted time. I just wish I think the balance is somewhat out of whack there. Second, that party label puts a tremendous burden on the judges. The parties want you to give money. In fact, that's one of the reasons a lot of party leaders are for judicial races, is they see that as a cash cow. Lawyers who aren't giving enough money to legislators directly, they'll get their money some other way. There's some pressure on judges in the party primaries because of the low votes there to take positions on issues that they don't want to take. And then there's pressure once you're elected to act like a Republican or act like a Democrat. And we've seen parties censure judges for the rulings they made in office. When the judges, right or wrong, just thought they were doing what they told them to do and follow the law. As a result of that, when a federal bench comes open, you see a whole lot of applicants from the bar and from the state bench. And you can see how many people run for judge. I mean, most races are still unopposed most of the time. So it worries me that we've got something of a talent drain in the state judiciary. I'm biased, and I really haven't been in federal court in a long time, but I think the average state judge has a more interesting docket than the average federal judges. When the federal judges get a good case, it's really good. But if you just pick a case at random, the state judiciary is a wonderful place. It's where people come interface with their government for justice. But we have a talent attraction and retention problem. The fourth thing is the qualifications. When I first became a judge, most lawyers went to court unless they were in a white shoe, big corporate practice. And if you had been a lawyer long enough to be eligible to run for judge, 4 years for trial, 10 years for appellate, you'd seen the inside of a courtroom. The nature of the dispute resolution process has changed. And our requirements, which are now nothing more than just, you've kept your license in this or some state for a certain number of years without being currently disbarred, does not guarantee that somebody's going to have any experience in the job for which the people choose them to serve. And I think we have seen some judges whose first trial was not from the advocate side of the bench, but from the presiding side. And finally, this is not just an issue I don't think, of what's going to give our citizens the best judges when they walk into court. This is an economic issue. Texas ranks near the bottom in rankings of people who know they're going to go to court, like corporate general counsel. Do they expect a fair trial? And it becomes, along with the other states, really, I think, a world economic issue. Because the great thing that America has contributed to the whole concept of self-government is the rule of law. And making the people who administer the rule of law as important a branch of government as either the executive or the legislative, and keeping them independent. And then that's really the great thing we have to offer in the 21st century. It's been one of our big attractions is contracts will be honored. You have your corporate headquarters here, it won't be arbitrarily seized by the government. People come here, they aren't going to be treated, unfairly based on extraneous political or racial or whatever consideration. Now, we're never actually meet all the promise of the rule of law, but the fact that we're trying, I think it is one of the huge things America has going for it. And, we sit here in each state being a part of creating that system that's going to make the rule of law as close to a reality. That promise as close to a reality as possible, and I think we do have a duty to look at that and see how to do it, even if it might be momentarily unpopular.
Okay, there's another hand up down there. Chief Justice Jefferson.
I was just going to say just a word about accountability. I think it is true that people believe they have a right to vote for their judges. And as a historical matter, there's a book by a professor named Jed Sugarman, I think his name is, who said the reason that judges were elected derived from the Andrew Jackson era. The populism. Andrew Jackson came in as a populist, and after that, more and more people were allowed to vote for their judges. And the idea was the judiciary should not be an aristocracy that is appointed in smoke-filled rooms without any participation by the electorate over whom these judges make enormous, important decisions. So it was really a way to bring power away from, the rich and the politically connected down to the people. The problem is that when the states began to grow like they have, and the urban centers became so huge that the people no longer really hold the judges accountable because they don't know who they are. And so they're just voting based on party affiliation or because the judge was able to raise enough money to get on TV a lot, which again moves the accountability back to the powerful because it's who can write the checks and who can fund these campaigns, and it's the wealthy corporations or lawyers or what have you. So somehow we've got to find a way to retain that accountability, to give the people still a say in who the judges are, but have an emphasis on merit. One, I think, very interesting and good thing about judicial elections, well, there are two. One is, even though I didn't like it, as a judge, I had to go out and campaign and talk to the people and to the lawyers and hear the concerns, and really as a result, I was able to bring innovations from all around the state to the judicial system, because there are good ideas in the rural and urban counties in north and southeast and west. It was very important. The other thing I think is diversifying the bench. You know, we worry about these sweeps, and I do. I'm one that worries about them. But in this last election, we have a lot of firsts. African American women and men in urban counties, Hispanics, Asians that may not get there through an appointment system where they have no political connections. And that's important to the public's confidence in the state. You don't want to, every time you walk into a courtroom, be the only racial minority in that room. The bench is not diverse, and the prosecuting and defense. It's important to the confidence in the court system. So that's another thing we have to do, is when we look at accountability, but we also have to look at what is the makeup of our judiciary, politically, ethnically, gender-wise. And I know these are all big issues, and we may not be able to tackle them all at one time, but I think those are, I just wanted to put those things out there for the commission.
Let me ask a question, Chief. And this is on the diversity issue, and I'm not suggesting some end result, but if for some reason the group decided to go to some type of an appointive system, wouldn't whoever does the appointing, such as the governor, they could be held accountable if they don't appoint a diverse judiciary?
So that's an interesting point. The first African-American statewide judge was Louis Stearns, appointed by Governor Clements, as well as the first woman on the Supreme Court of Texas, as well as the first Hispanic. So you can have the appointment process can be used to diversify in a way that never happened before. I wouldn't have been on the Supreme Court of Texas as the first African American had it not been for gubernatorial appointment as either justice or chief justice. So that can, a commission, if that's where we go, or an appointed authority, can certainly take that into account. And the people appointing, or the governor, whoever it is, can be held to task if they don't put those interests as important.
Chip?
Yeah, just to amplify a little bit about the problems, the evils I see in our current system, and that is the money, and that's related to the education aspect. Judges raise money ostensibly so that they can educate the people. Not all the money they raise, however, goes into that. And I don't know, we maybe ought to look and see if we can find out how much of the money is actually spent on trying to educate the people about the qualifications of the candidate. I suspect it's certainly not 100%, and I don't know how much less it is than that. Everybody at the table probably remembers Watergate. I'm not so sure about some of the youngsters behind us, but you remember Deep Throat, the source for the Washington Post, said follow the money. And look at the amount of money that's being spent in our state. Law 360 did a survey, I don't know if any of you all saw it, a couple months ago, I guess, or weeks ago, and they surveyed all the money that was spent on judicial elections, and Texas had law firms, or 9 of the top 10 firms were from Texas, And the number one firm spent almost $1 million contributing money to judges. That's a lot of money, just one law firm. And then the rest of them were under $1 million, but in the high hundreds of thousands. And that just has to erode the confidence in our judiciary. Everybody has got anecdotes. Harris County, there's one district judge, civil district judge, who won't accept money from lawyers who have cases in front of them. Flip that around, all the other judges will accept money from people that have cases pending in front of them. That's just a bad perception in my view. I was about to go to trial in a case in Fort Worth in Tarrant County. In 2 weeks before trial, my opponent contributed $4,000 to the judge. Well, how did that make my client feel? Not very good. And what am I going to do? Am I going to contribute $4,000? No. But it just erodes confidence in the judiciary. Final point, somebody raised the issue of, well, maybe we can regulate the money. Maybe we can do something about that. And maybe we can. But as some of you know, I do a lot of work in the First Amendment area. And the U.S. Supreme Court has said under the First Amendment that money is speech. And so regulating the money has to take into account the right of people to contribute to political candidates, be they judges or not, and spend money on these judges, and regulating the money is not as easy as we may think. So to me, one of the big problem is the money, and our efforts to resolve the issue we have in front of us has to deal with that.
David?
I just want to follow up on Chip. In South Texas, it's huge. I mean, you run for state district court and you get to raise $500,000. You have a lot of judges who, will say, I'm afraid I'm going to get an opponent. They'll have a big fundraiser. They expect all the firms to contribute the max. And most of the time, they don't get an opponent. And Senator Hinojosa knows. We've got some judges that have $500,000 in their campaign accounts, but you still have to give, knowing that they're probably not going to give them. So I see that as a huge problem, and I'd love for this committee to tackle that in any way we can. But yeah, the expectation is that and for state district court races, that I think it's $2,500 per firm, but you can give up to $5,000 of individual partners. Well, they all expect that, and I don't think the public understands that. If they don't get an opponent, they're allowed to spend that money on I think they can contribute to other campaigns, they can contribute to charitable, they can contribute to the party. So I'm not sure that the public understands where a lot of that money's going, but I think that's something this committee definitely needs to tackle.
Okay. Yes, Senator?
You started this conversation by you can't fix a problem if you don't identify it. So you asked all of us to try to put some points out of what we think. I agree with Senator Hinojosa. The partisan nature of the election causes a problem. Or I'm not going to repeat everything that was said, but for a different kind of reason. I served for 9 years on the city council as councilman and as mayor. That's a nonpartisan. It worked. You go out and you campaign, you talk to people, and you're not one party or the other. And that's pretty much that way all over the state, as I understand it. So it can work. The dark side of this is the campaign dollars. This has been talked. So to me, that's the number. I'm not sure if that's number one or number two. But the third thing that I have concerns about with all the stuff that I've read during the holidays about these qualification committees and whatever you want to call them is, how do you determine there's certain things you can determine qualifications. Did you practice enough years? What certifications have you had? Have you served as a judge before, and so on? The thing that's very difficult to measure, and I'm not sure you can measure, is a person's character. And that, to me, is a very important thing when somebody's a judge. What is the character of this person? And so I always get nervous when we talk about setting qualification.
Well, on the qualifications point, let me give you an anecdote from Houston. We have 2 judges, Democrats, that are up for election. I've tried cases in both their courts, and they're both very, very good judges. they have both drawn opponents in the primary. And the issue is, should we have certain minimum qualifications for somebody running for judge? Like you must have, if you're going to be a trial judge, must you have at least seen a case tried or tried a case or been in the court? Something like that to avoid situations where somebody says, well, I just throw my name in the hat, I don't need to spend any money, and depending upon what happens with the rest of the ticket, I may win. So I think that's an issue we're going to have to grapple with. I was talking to, or emailing with Tom Phillips earlier yesterday about whether we're going to have to change a statute if we went that direction, or the Constitution, or what. So some of these changes, whatever we may come up with, ain't going to be easy. I mean, it's going to require 2/3 of the Senate for one thing, maybe even a constitutional amendment. So, but as somebody said earlier, a step at a time. A step at a time is maybe what we need to do. There's another hand up.
I have
Yes,
a thought,
Senator.
too. And it's interesting to call through what Todd was saying about having to, if it's constitutional, having a 2/3, which now in today's legislature means have to be bipartisan.
Mm-hmm.
So that's important, and I think it's a good thing actually for this commission that we're going to have to work in a bipartisan way. But talking about partisanship, I think it's important to understand one of the issues that continues to drive the desire to keep it partisan in some ways is your point about when you go down the ballot and you don't recognize the name. There are many people who find comfort, and I'm just speaking honestly here because I've been working with this issue a long time, and we've talked to a lot of people and had a lot of people testify. There is comfort on many folks when they vote to know if someone is a Republican or a Democrat. They already know they may not agree with that person on every issue, but they feel like they are more comfortable perhaps with either the R or the D if they're going to have to make a decision with very little information. So as we look for solutions, I think that is a problem that we are going to continue to face, is what our constituents think about their involvement in this process. And as we kind of chip away at making changes, I think we have to continue to remember that it is the conundrum of, in the rural areas, it's a different issue, and in the big urban areas, and I'm sure everyone in here has voted in Harris County, the state of Harris County, and in every judicial election that they can remember. And it's a struggle even now, and I will say that I'm a Republican, been elected as a Republican, but I still take the time in the judicial races to go down and look, because I think it's important for me to understand who the judges are and who they are, who am I voting for. And I take that responsibility very seriously, but it's very difficult for me to be informed about these individuals. And if it's difficult for me, it's going to be virtually impossible for most of the voters. And we just have to remember that that is a problem that is out there. And I don't know how we approach that issue, but it is a continuing problem.
Let me ask this question of the group, and I'm not trying to commit people to a position. I'm just trying to get a sense of where I think we are in the problems. Is there anybody who believes that partisan elections are the way to go?
I'm not convinced they're not. So I'm just going to say that.
Okay.
Because I have an open mind, but I feel like I have to speak for
Okay.
a lot of people who.
And we haven't had the hearings, we haven't had the hearings yet.
No
Get
question.
information on
Yeah,
that.
no question. I'm just trying to get a sense of, I'm trying to focus on what are the problems. We can solve problems if we know what they are, and we can agree on what the problems are. And I'm just trying to get a sense of what we believe the problem is.
And I'm not saying it's not a problem. I'm
Right,
just saying I
right.
don't know what the solution is.
In the past, I think there have been proposals to leave the district courts separate and apart from the appointment process. They've been recommended and suggested through legislation, only because, as you say, in some of the rural areas, it's very different. Everybody knows who the district judges are. But in places like Harris County, that's a real challenge. For me, I do not favor partisan elections. I just don't. I think that's probably policy for the judiciary, and I don't prefer a different approach.
Okay. Yeah, Chip?
Yeah, David, I think I agree with the senators, but if part of the problem is the absence of information, when that voter goes into the booth, and they look at the down ballot judicial race, what information are they given? They're given a name. If it's, as Chief Justice Jefferson said, if it's an ethnic name, maybe they react badly to it or positively, who knows? But that's no basis to vote. If it's a man or a woman, they probably know that unless the candidate's name is Pat. And is that a basis without more to vote? I'm always going to vote for a woman. So the only substantive thing that the voter is confronted with is the party. And at least the party is thought to stand for something. Now, in reality, maybe the party has not recruited a candidate that really adheres to whatever it is the party stands for. But nevertheless, that is some information. So if you take that away and you have an election, now you're down to just the name and the sex and nothing more. There's been a proposal that maybe we should say who the incumbent is. And that would be more information. And that would be more relevant, really, than the party affiliation. But I think we have to think about curing the lack of information to the voter.
Now, I think that's a valid point, but the rebuttal would be that, well, if somebody runs as a Democrat or Republican and supposedly embraces the principles or concepts of either party, and somebody votes on that basis, then that judge the next day, is that judge supposed to follow those principles and concepts, or suddenly that's gone by the board and now they're totally nonpartisan independent? I mean, that's the counter to that.
Yeah, I don't know if it's a rebuttal. It's an absolutely accurate statement.
Yeah. Okay, Martha, you've been awfully quiet.
I know, I told you I wasn't going to give you any trouble today.
Yeah, what she said was, I'm not going to give you any trouble today.
Right.
Well, and I don't want to jump ahead because I know that you mentioned that I had a letter and.
Well, now's a good time to go into your.
Well, okay. Well, as we approach these things, and those of us particularly, and I'm so glad Senator Duncan's here because he has more battle scars probably than anybody. Thank you for all that. I hope you finish nursing your wounds a little bit. I can't believe you want to come jump back into this, but thank you for being here. I think it's really easy, as all the legislators in the room know, it is a whole lot easier to kill a bill than it is to pass a bill. And so I think the temptation is, for those of us who are somewhat shock-worn over this issue, is to remember a previous battle and, well, this didn't work because of that or that or that, or, you know, so why bother? And I think it's also difficult to poo-poo a suggestion because, yeah, we tried that in 2003 or something like that. And not everybody remembers 2003 with regard to this issue. So I think we may have come in with our pre-existing favorite solutions, but I think it's really important for us to go back, and if, for example, if there is not an advocate for the current system, we need to find one and find out what's working. Mr. Nicholas, or Senator Nicholas, I mean, I've always had thought that too, the urban, rural. I used to live in Tyler, and yes, we hung out at the Petroleum Club back then too, so we knew our judges. But I don't know if everybody's still going to a Petroleum Club and seeing their judges. Also, we're mentioning some issues that come up more in a civil trial situation where there's money at stake. And of course, Lynn and I have the advantage of an intermediate appellate experience, so we know that there are many, many lawsuits out there that are being decided not based on, you know, corporate interest and this, that, and the other. The criminal, juvenile. Senator Huffman remembers that as well. That there are, you know, other stakeholders out there where some of the issues are the same, but are they? You know. I learned, much to my chagrin, that when I went from being a civil trial judge to being an intermediate appellate judge, I couldn't raise as much money all of a sudden. And I was listening to very important cases, but they weren't nearly as interesting apparently to the people who were funding as below. So, just bring all that up for us to remember that, you know, our past is not our future, and that we have an opportunity to look a little more broadly and not lock ourselves into suggestions that we've tried and failed in the past, and not to get discouraged because of all those things. And yes, it is true that at the end of the day, if we were to try to alter the current system, it may require either statutory or constitutional change, but I don't want us to block ourselves before we get to that point, because we don't really know what that is. Money, I think, yes, is number one. You know, qualifications is interesting. As I'm listening to y'all talk, I kind of reflect on what I have found personally to be the qualifications that have helped me be such an outstanding jurist. Certainly, you know, intellect and curiosity are two things. Being teachable is a huge thing, and I don't know how you measure that. I mean, it's one thing to be smart, it's another thing not to think you're the smartest person in the room, or have to be the smartest person in the room, and are willing to learn from others who are there. And then I had this parental termination case last week. I was a substitute teacher, so you can imagine what that was, a visiting judge. And, you know, it's like driving a stagecoach. So you have to be a manager as well. And you got to keep your cool. Those are, you know, all the things, this is a push-pull, push-pull. So there are things that are not necessarily, you know, locked into a statute that come across, and frankly would be probably better discovered through a newspaper interview or a commission interview to find out how someone can handle a situation. And of course, these guys know what it's like to try to keep your colleagues from usurping the available time and with their own pontifications as things go along. So,
Okay. Well, one of the things that I find intriguing by Martha's letter was that she basically said, look, let's test some of the assumptions that we've embraced in the past, which is people in the rural areas really like to elect their judges and want to elect their judges. And Senator, you alluded to this, talking about in East Texas. And I think Martha's point was, is that true or not today?
And Deep East Texas.
And I think that's a valid point. I mean, some of these assumptions that we all seem to embrace, I mean, let's be willing to test them and make sure. And I've asked David Slayton, I said, do you have any data on this? And he said, no, not on that particular point, but maybe we can figure out a way to do it. Yeah, Justice Phillips.
I'd be interested in seeing how people in states that have retention elections, how the voters view those, because in fact, in Texas, the vast majority of rural judges are not opposed. At least when I was in office, half the judges have been appointed and had never had an opponent. So naturally, they were huge friends of democracy. Because in a retention system, everybody gets voted on. You do have that incentive to be nice to jurors and witnesses as election time approaches. But if people in those states regard that election as a joke, and in fact not very many people are turned out in retention elections, then that's an important piece of data. But if it's just a kind of election people don't know about and aren't used to, so therefore they say, we're not willing to get rid of the kind of election we know, that's something else.
I'd also like to share something real quick about the money, which applies to my experience, probably not to the statewide office holders. But there's only so much money that is useful in a judicial campaign. Don't tell anybody I said this. And that has been in the past because in, for example, an urban county, the only thing that you can do is sort of put your tie in with all the others on your team, be it the red team or the blue team. And then without much control, they put out a little something. But an individual really cannot afford to run an effective, persuasive campaign all by themselves. That is a lot of money. And I would imagine even in the smaller TV buy markets, it's probably about the same as well. And most judges just cannot raise that. So what the poor lawyers are doing is, kind of being bullied in a way, because we're expecting you to give and you feel that pressure to give, but maybe they're going to make some emery boards and take them around to the county fair or something, but they're not probably going to be HEB on the TV all the time. They're not going to get J.J. Watt to come, stump for them. So a lot of the money that's in these judicial races, I hate to, and I'm accepting the statewide, it really is not meaningful.
Okay.
Let me
Yes, sir.
throw two things out there. We're going to be looking at the legislature. You're going to have a census that comes up in January 2021. And so I predict that it's going to say urban America is where the growth is in Texas. If that happens, we can talk judicial selection, but then we've got to look at the courts of appeals to see if that jurisdiction really makes sense based on population moves. That's something that has to be looked at. The other thing is what about if the concentration of certain communities is that high? You do a judicial selection. Remember, a lot of the county courts, whether they're unlimited or not, are funded by those counties. And so we can't do something that impacts the finances on the taxpayer. And so I just think when you're giving us analysis, you have two trends that are going to hit in January of 2021.
I'm sorry, Senator, I didn't quite understand what you meant.
Well, I appreciate that. I'm a representative.
Oh, I'm sorry, I gave you promotion. I'm sorry.
See, the deal is we have to widen the door more for the Senate. So I knew they would wake them up.
Hey, you. Hey, you.
Call me Tom.
I didn't.
Not Toad.
Tell me one more time about the impacting the tax base with, are you talking about redistricting
No,
courts?
well, no, I'm not, that will be an issue.
Yeah.
When you look at your population,
Yeah.
there are a lot of courts. I mean, Senator Duncan's here, and most of us have all been on the creation of courts. A lot of times that impacts certain counties on how they fund. And so we have two things. The Senate, I can tell you this, don't take this negative, but I don't want to set up a system that says, hey, in deep East Texas and deep South Texas, we're going to be dominated by North Texas judges. Well, that's not going to sell too quickly right off the bat. And then the second thing is, if counties fund part of county judges and you see population shifts, you don't want to bankrupt or come up with a system that financially burdens some of these. A state district judge is funded a lot of times differently than a county court at law, and then in our area we have unlimited jurisdiction county courts. So I'm just saying we probably need information to watch the trend, so if we come up with something, we don't impact the tax-paying area of the state.
Okay, is that part of our charge?
I'm just saying whatever public policy it could indirectly.
Okay, thanks.
That's all.
I think we've reached the point we're going to ask Megan to make this presentation on the landscape that we're going to be dealing with. So Megan, let me just turn it over to you.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Megan LeBoy. I'm Director of Public Affairs for the Office of Court Administration. As David said, I have worked on this issue, not as much as everyone in this room. There's a lot of experience at this table, but as a staffer for Senator Duncan, and then also as staff to the Texas Judicial Council, which has worked on this issue extensively. I know there was a lot of, it's not part of the presentation, but I thought I should mention, there's a lot of talk about qualifications and what statutes, and whether there could be a constitutional amendment. We compiled a list of all the relevant statutes and items in the Constitution, and so we'll hand that out to the Commission. But I will say that the qualifications for the High Court, the appellate courts, and also district courts are all in the Constitution, with the exception of the age of a district judge, and that's in the statute. So, should also add, so I'm going to give the national look at what states across the country are doing with judicial selection, and my colleague, who is our Chief Data Officer, Angela Garcia, is going to drill down into the Texas data. So we kind of already talked about this a little bit, about the different selection methods that the states are using across the country. So you have nonpartisan elections, partisan elections, gubernatorial appointments, legislative appointment. There's actually only 2 states where the legislature appoints judges, and that's South Carolina and Virginia. Obviously, legislatures are very involved in the process through confirmation, or the Senate being the one to confirm judges, or the House, and in some states, both chambers. There has also been a lot of talk about the Missouri plan. The Missouri plan combines certain elements of appointment and election-based selection methods. There's also very different hybrids of the Missouri plan. So the traditional Missouri plan is gubernatorial appointment with a nomination commission that's making the recommendations to the governor. And then the judges will then sit usually 2 to 3 years after they're appointed for a retention election. That's a yes or no vote. Hybrid selection. Hawaii is mentioned up here, but an interesting hybrid is New Mexico, and they actually do an appoint, elect, retain system. So they, governor makes the appointment, they have a partisan election following the appointment, and then they have retention elections thereafter, the yes or no vote. So lots of talk this morning about judicial nomination commissions. These are typically independent bodies made up of various appointments, usually typically by the governor, some by the legislature, and some by the state bar. You can see that nomination commissions are widely used. 36 states and DC have a nominating commission for different levels of court. An overwhelming majority of the state commissions, those recommendations to the governor are binding. You can see there's 7 that are not binding, and that means that they make a recommendation to the governor, and the governor can take it or leave it. So this map, there's 3, one for each level of court. We have the Supreme Court, the appellate courts, and then the trial courts. So this is taken from the Brennan Center for Justice. If you haven't been to the website, I encourage you. It's actually on the website an interactive map, so you can go to each state and it will tell you exactly how they elect each level of their courts and any nuances that they have. And I can tell you that no state does it the same. There are nuances at every level of court. So typically, though, at the Supreme Court level, predominantly they are appointed by the governor, and obviously Texas and Oklahoma, they have 2 high courts. And Oklahoma, you can see some variation of the Missouri plan. You'll see just trends is that at the trial court level, there's much more prevalence of contested elections than gubernatorial appointment. And I'll leave this up here just in case you'll have any questions or comments about this that you can see. And this is the next, the intermediate appellate courts. You can see the gray states, they don't have intermediate appellate courts. Some of the nuances here, so for example, at the appellate court level in Illinois, if there is a vacancy on the appellate court, the justices of the Supreme Court actually fill that vacancy. If it's in the middle of a term, I would say too, also, one of the trends is that the terms are definitely longer than Texas, some 10 to 12, and some states even have lifetime appointments. And here is the trial court, and you can see a lot more green on the map. The trial court level obviously has been discussed because these are the judges that are the district judges, the county judges, they're in the community, you see them at the grocery store. There's a lot more states that have either partisan or nonpartisan elections at the trial court level. You can see the 2 states that have the appointment via the legislature at every level of court. I think the interesting thing is you can see the colors change as I switch the map, is that the states don't do exactly the same at every level of court. So this is recent changes to judicial selection. I was asked the other day, like, what's the predominant theme? And the answer is there isn't one. States that have been doing merit selection for years are moving to nonpartisan or partisan elections, and vice versa. States that have been doing partisan elections are trying to move more toward the merit system. I believe West Virginia is the latest. And this doesn't include, obviously, states that have eliminated straight ticket voting. In 2020, there's actually only going to be 7 states that continue straight ticket voting. And this is just a really brief, I wish I had more boxes because the history of judicial selection in Texas is quite lengthy. I probably could have had 100 boxes on here. But just things to note is since 1946, there was a little bit of debate because in our office of whether it was 1929 or 1946 when the Judicial Council first recommended changes to judicial selection. But this is the first documented 1946 when they made that recommendation, and I will say that the council every year since 1946 has made a recommendation to change how we select our judges. There's a lot of talk about the Committee of 100 in 1986, and we do have some of that committee's work too if the commission is interested. A lot of the action started happening in the 90s and early 2000s with Senator Duncan's work and Senator Ellis and Representative Gallego and a couple others that really worked on trying to get anything through. There's a appoint, elect, retain systems that was tried, gubernatorial appointments, and so you can see from 1995 all the way to 2001, a lot of action there. The most recent big change that's been talked about in 2017 was elimination of straight ticket voting, which will go into effect this year. And then obviously in 2019, creation of this commission. So if there's no questions, we'll transition over to diving a little bit more into the Texas data. And as David said earlier, the Office of Court Administration has a wealth of information on this issue and data, and we're happy to fulfill any requests you might have.
I'm Angela Garcia. I joined OCA's Judicial Information Department 18 years, so I've been around for all these cycles as these conversations continue. So as part of the judicial pay raise bill in 2005, OCA has been required to collect information on judicial turnover and the reasons for that turnover. So we have collected it back since the 2004 election year. For our state years, fiscal 2004 through 19, the average rate that people were not reelected was 3%, with spikes in 2006 and 2008, and then this just absolutely significant, shocking 12% judicial turnover in the last election. Over the same period, there has been a general increase in judges deciding.
Here.
Does that include both primary and general elections?
Yes, it does, as a total, yes. And another interesting trend that we've been seeing is that judges are increasingly deciding not to run for re-election. And we do a turnover survey for all judges that leave voluntarily, and increasingly, the compensation issue has not been number one. It is the election process, and the comments that we're getting from the judges are about the election process and all the issues that we've discussed in this meeting. So out of the judges that have left, the percentage that left for election defeat has generally been around 30%, but it has ranged from 26% or 20% to almost 50% in certain election cycles. Then from 2010 to 2014, the most common reason was deciding not to run for re-election. In terms of proportion of the judges who are leaving, the proportion deciding to resign at the end of their term, before the end of their term, has been declining. So it's really a lot of involuntary turnover and deciding not to run for re-election.
On the data with respect to judges deciding not to run for re-election, did we drill down on that to find out why they were not running for re-election?
Yes, we do have one question, and they can select different options. Back in 2004, it was compensation, and increasingly it's retirement.
Thank you.
The economy?
Retirement.
Okay.
We have some data that's not included here that might be helpful to you all, which shows the aging of the judiciary. At all levels of court, we are seeing an pretty significant increase in the age of our judiciary at every level, district, appellate, and the high courts. Of course, when there's a turnover in the high court with the younger judges, that obviously with only 9 on each court, that changes it. But there's been some concern within the judiciary about that, because as we see people get to the end and decide they want to retire and leave the bench, who are going to be the replacements of those folks? So it's just something for you to keep in mind. We can get you that data as well, but just the bottom line is the aging is pretty significantly increasing for every level.
And I haven't looked at it since after the election, how the average age has changed with all the new blood in, but I did look at the distribution of people, the appellate judges and district judges that are in the 1 to 4 years of experience in that position, and it was very, very high. So last biennium, nearly 140 judges left office, and almost half of them were defeated in the last election, and 30% decided not to seek re-election. The greatest change due to loss of an election occurred at the appellate court level, with half of incumbents defeated. 30% of incumbent statutory probate courts were defeated, as were 1/5 of district judges and 14% of county court at law judges. And most of them lost in the general election. Only 7 lost in the primary. This is a graphic pulled from a report that shows the partisan sweeps by appellate, district and county court is here. So in the purple districts, in areas where there's more substantial, even support for the parties, the election results have been dependent on the strength of the party in the straight ticket voting and who's on higher up on the ballot, whether it's gubernatorial or presidential election. And the Republican Party has swept the high courts for a very long time. In the courts of appeals races, where there were 1 or more positions on the ballot for a court, the rate of increase here in terms of one party dominating all positions has been increasing. So in 2014, one party swept all of the courts of appeals in positions that were open at the time, same with 2016 and same with 2018. And then at the county and district level, we're seeing an increase as well, and that's going to be in our urban counties where we have those purple areas. Great example is Harris County, where you can see that the Democrats and the Republicans are really, really close in terms of support. And the majority party, or the majority party, at the time, in these contested races, picked up 85 to 100% of the votes sometimes. And that resulted in a very high level of turnover as it flipped. every time. So I looked at the median years of experience as an attorney for the defeated judges versus their opponents. And pretty much at every level, the difference was 10 years of experience. And the median is the midpoint. So that means that for county courts at law, half of judges had more than 25 years of experience and half had less. And the opponents, half had 16 years of experience or more and half had less. And the median is a better measure than the average because the average gets skewed by outliers. So as total number of experience lost in the last election, 170 years of experience at the appellate level, almost 400 at the district, 40 at probate, and those are only 18 judges. And the county courts at law lost 245 years. A lot of people don't realize how many judges are actually selected initially by appointment. At the appellate level, it has always been, the majority have been selected by appointment until this last election, when the judges got wiped out. At the district level, it has been an average of, I think it's a third of judges, and went down to 27%. And at the county level, it's typically been about a quarter of judges are initially assuming office by appointment.
So just to be clear with this, especially for those that might be watching remotely, probably everyone in this room knows, but so when there is a vacancy created in the middle of a term, then there's an appointing authority who makes these appointments. So obviously at the appellate and district level, that's the governor making the appointment. At the county courts at law and county level, it's the commissioner's court. They're making this appointment. So you already have I think the point here is that at least at the appellate level, traditionally over half of our appellate court judges are originally coming to the bench by appointment already. And then about, I guess we're close to around 40% of the district court judges, so a little smaller at the county level.
And is that still heavily skewed that urban judges tend to reach more by election and rural more by appointment, or is that?
I have not looked at that.
I'm sorry, what was the answer?
I have not looked at that,
Okay.
whether there's an urban-rural
Thank you.
difference.
We should be able to get that information. We have that. We can
Define rural.
We can look at it in different tiers, and let you know, and then you all can define rural versus urban.
Since January of 2010, there have been 132 appellate judges and district judges appointed. 1/4 were defeated in their first election, so they served less than 2 years. So it goes back to the question of why would I even do this, or even if I get appointed, I'm going to get defeated, so what's the point? And I think the governor's office is having a hard time finding candidates for appointment. Any questions on the data or anything else that you would like to see?
I'll ask you, because I was going to bring it up, something I think would be helpful, and it's not really anything that either one of you covered, and that has to do in these appointed selection committee, we'll call it the Missouri Plan type states, you keep seeing retention elections. And in my mind, I'm not sure if a retention election is real. I know it'll be on the ballot somewhere, but it would be helpful if we could gather some information, it'd be helpful to me. You know, are these retention elections held in what I call major election cycles, either in a primary cycle or in a general election cycle, number one. Number two, compare the number of votes. If people go down the ballot to vote, actually take the time to get down there on that ballot, compare the number of votes at that level in a retention to, let's say, the top of the ticket. I mean, 50% of the people voting on those, or is it 70 or 80%? And then the third thing is, how often are they actually voted out in relationship to how many retention elections they have in a particular year? Because my gut guess is almost going to be zero.
That is an accurate statement.
That's correct.
We can get you the exact numbers, but very few people are not retained.
Yeah, so is a retention election a real election, or is it just put out there to make people feel good? If I don't like my judge, I can get him out.
I would
That was kind of my impression.
I'd also add,
People feel good.
Yeah.
Senator Nichols, that in a lot of these states that do have the retention elections, the term limits are much longer, between 8 and 12 years. And so that also plays a role. So they wouldn't go up for retention sometimes until.
But the short answer is, in a retention election, you've got to really be bad to be voted out.
Well, bad, or there's a political win that's going. Like in Iowa,
Yes.
there are judges that have retention elections that voted in favor of same-sex marriage or something like that, and then there was a campaign to defeat them. And in a lot of retention election states, the judges believe that they should not campaign, and so they just leave it to the whim of the voters. After that Iowa example, a lot more retained judges get out and campaign and raise money again. So some of the dynamics shift for that reason.
And that's a very valid point. Thank you for mentioning it. Okay,
Question regarding the statement you made, the governor is challenged in finding qualified judges who are willing to serve, knowing the capricious nature of these elections. And when I hear that, I'm wondering then, how do we explain the number of candidates who are actually running for these seats on election time? There's a lot of judges who are running, or folks who are candidates to be judged. Now, I guess that gets to the question of whether they are qualified. A dog catcher can run for state rep, so it may not be.
Present company excepted.
Goes without saying. But anyway, so that argument, though, that he's having difficulty finding qualified judges willing to serve, is one that I'm just concerned about. When people are also saying to us, don't take away our right to vote for the judge that I deem to be qualified.
Yeah, I've noticed in the urban areas, the qualifications and the experience of the judges that are being appointed are minimal. Like, they are pretty fresh. And it's getting younger and younger, and
I think we need to drill down to that last statement that Representative Sherman made, which was people really, really want to vote for the person they deem to be qualified. I think people do want to do the right thing. They do want to vote for the right candidate, but they really are unable or unwilling to discover who that person is. So they really want to vote, but not necessarily for somebody. Does that make sense? They really, really, really want to be able to vote, but it's not because they want to vote for you.
Right.
They just want to be the person who does the voting.
They want to exercise their right.
They want to exercise their right, but they are unable or unwilling to determine what would be a qualified person. And so, yeah.
Yeah, I think, your point is very clear, Judge Jameson. I think that at the end of the day, one can argue that the people receive the representation that they deserve based on their participation in the electoral process. And so I know, we're looking at what is the best way to make this nonpartisan,
Right.
which I think, you can't avoid the issue of the money influence in this process that may be a huge influence on it.
And I don't mean to disrespect the voter.
No.
They've treated me very, very well in the past. But I'm just saying that I think the passion is around the right to vote, not necessarily the identity of the candidates.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Getting back to the issue of the governor having a hard time finding qualified candidates for these appointments, I think those are in areas like South Texas where they know a Republican, appointee is not going to win in most of the areas of South Texas. So I know, like, a lot of the appointments that have been made to the 13th Court of Appeals, and our good friend Ernie Ali Southern, got appointed, who's tremendously experienced and competent, and he didn't get elected. So when this last appointment came up and the governor, was looking, Ernie, said, I'm not going to run because, I can't disrupt my law practice again for a term that, was only 2 years. And so I think that's the problem he's having. I don't think it's in areas where, when he's appointing Republicans in areas that Republicans are getting elected, I think there's plenty of qualified people. I think it's hard to find somebody in the areas where that candidate knows I'm not going to.
I'll just give you one more data point too, sort of maybe Mr. Huffman mentioned something also, Jameson's point. Just to make sure you all know, in the last election, I want to mention a specific judge, but there was a judge who was elected who was under indictment, who'd been removed from the bench because he was under indictment, and he ran for election and was elected overwhelmingly. Of course, basically the day he took office, was suspended from the bench by the State Commissioner of Chicago because he was under indictment, and then ultimately convicted in federal court for what he'd been done.
That would be my home county, by the way.
That's part of the consequence of partisan elections. I mean, we have a lot of good Republican judges appointed in South Texas, but they don't win when they run for election.
Well, I think as we have seen, that the Office of Court Administration and David's and his staff are a tremendous resource for us. And so if there are any questions, any data that you think we need to get, just let me know and let David know, or Megan, and we'll try to get it. And the word is out that the Texas legislature has appointed this commission, because I'm getting all kind of letters from people. The University of Denver has sent us a report. I guess the TLR Foundation did an analysis of other states, which I've looked at, and it's pretty darn good. So I've asked Megan to distribute that to everybody. They don't advocate anything. They just simply point out data telling us what other states are doing and the pros and cons of all of these various systems. And our mission is to try to sift through HB 3040, which lists at least 8 separate alternatives we're supposed to look at, and that is a non-exclusive list. So we can look at a lot of different areas that House Bill 3040 doesn't even mention. But we've got a tremendous resource here in David and his staff, so let's take advantage of it. If we can give everybody before they leave the TLR Foundation report, I think that would be very helpful. Let me mention, yes.
I was just going to say, talking about our small budget, I don't know if we can afford to get a statistically significant survey on any of these issues, but I would be satisfied with some first-hand accounts, kind of on-the-street interviews with preferably non-lawyers to test what the citizenry truly feel in some of these areas.
I can speak to that.
Yeah.
So we did, we have a poll from 2014 that the Judicial Council did of the citizens about selection methods. I'll give you the bottom line, which is that the electorate, we gave them multiple options, and the electorate is not convinced that the system that we have right now is not the best system. So to the degree you all want to change, and it's a constitutional amendment, there's going to have to be some education. It's now 5 years old, so maybe things have changed. We did polling the year before last. We did not include the selection issue in that. But to the degree you want to, there probably is some funding. We could probably do that if that's something the commission wants to do. The price that we paid on the last polling, we should be able to have the funding to cover that as part of the budget that's been provided.
Now, would you tag along on somebody else's poll?
We would
this be just solely for our purposes?
What I would suggest is that we would just do polling just for this issue. The longer the poll is, the less likely people are to participate.
But one of the things when you ask some of these people how they feel, and voters the time don't even know and understand the issue.
Exactly.
And quite frankly, sometimes too much democracy creates chaos.
We'll distribute to you the 2014 polling just so you can see the responses, because we had paired this or that, this or that, this or that, and
but I think it's critical how you frame the issue. If you ask somebody on the street, are you willing to give up your right to vote for judges, the overwhelming answer is going to be no. So you just need to word it in kind of a balanced way so that you can try to get to it.
I'd like to find where the passion is.
Yeah. A couple of housekeeping issues. Yes, Senator.
I was going to suggest that we may not, since we don't have a lot of money, polls, good polls, which is what you want, are expensive. I don't know that I would spend the money to do that. You may have some of the other associations that are very interested in this issue that have more resources. See if they would be interested in doing something like that if we trust whoever's doing the polling. But since I've got acquainted and started studying it, I don't talk about it at any service clubs or Republican clubs or anything like that. The people that I know, and I've known a long time, I've talked to a fair number of people about the issue because it's interesting. And so far, 100% of them are shocked that we would even consider taking their ability to vote for the judge. So I think that's what your poll's going to show.
Yeah.
A bit in the 90s.
Justice Phillips?
I know what we're supposed to come up with at the end is a report. But I'd like to know from the legislators what they find most helpful, you know, down and dirty summary with 200 pages of data for those, for your staff.
Well, it's more than just a report, it's recommendations as well.
Yeah, right, so in deciding how we spend our limited amount of money, I'm just kind of interested in what we think now this would look like at the end.
You know, I think poll is important, but we can't make a decision based on polls on this judicial selection. Sometimes, you know, you got to take an approach that's more of a public policy approach of issues than sort of figure out which way to vote based on a poll.
I totally agree with that. On the other hand, I also want to be sure that we're not fighting problems that aren't there and that we are addressing the issues that people are passionate about. And being a little more clear on what exactly it is that because if we just say, oh, they're passionate about voting, well, I don't know where we go from there. So that's why I just want to know a little bit more specifically about what it is that folks want to do. As you were saying earlier, they really, really, really want to vote. You know, and then I think they kind of get choked up when they kind of figure out how do I do this responsibly?
Well, but we identify the problems that exist under the present election system. We look at different options that might work or might not work. I think it would be asking too much of a voter in a poll how to get a complicated issue that we're dealing with into just a one question or a series of questions to get them to give us the proper response.
Maybe more like a focus group.
Senator Huffman, I think you had.
Yeah, I was just going to say that as we work together, I mean, I think that we have to keep at the top of our minds is we need a thoughtful bipartisan solution, because I've been down this road. Senator Duncan, you can speak up. We've had, as soon as you have, even you find some legislation, we come up with recommendations, someone files a bill, and if any time you have the Democrats, the more partisan Democrats and the more partisan Republicans show up and testify in these public hearings, they start contacting the legislators, it's dead, okay? If you've got both sides not liking something from the beginning going in, I promise you guys, it's dead. Senator Duncan, I know you're not on this, but you can speak up, and I'm right, and there's other legislators here who are going to back me up. So that's why the solutions or the recommendations that come from this commission, I think, have to be something that Senator Hinojosa and others can sell to their Democrats, even the most partisan, and Senator Nichols and I and Senator Birdwell and others as Republicans can sell to our just good thinking Republicans, or more partisan. They're all good, but they're all going to be very invested in this issue, and that's what's going to be a success. And I don't know how we get there, whether it needs to be a poll, but that's the only way we're going to be successful.
Well, let me address Tom.
Yeah, Todd.
The bottom line, premature. And I have a little different.
But just the format.
Yeah, you're talking about the format. It's premature because right now, if you try to get your format, next meeting we may have a different issue. So it's probably better to raise where are we going to go on the format maybe March after a couple of meetings, because I have a little different view. I mean, I've raised the issue And if you only focus on election and taking away, well, nobody's going for that. But if I say I want to put nonpartisan in there, I get a complete good reaction on it. If I talk about finances and why it looks bad to have somebody that gave $400,000 against some pro se person, they don't think that looks good at all. And so when you educate these issues to the public, there are certain things that do stand out. But what you're asking is where should we go? What should the package be? I'm not sure any of us yet could give you constructive advice, because I think what the senator said is if we solidified too early right now, we already have opposition with a February meeting.
My question was too vague and may well be premature, but what I was really getting at, the subtext is we have an excellent staff here. I think this work is first class. Would our money be well spent hiring an academic who has studied this stuff nationwide, for 20 years, or is our money better spent here at home on travel and whatever? That's really what my question was, and I didn't frame it very directly.
I say keep it here.
Okay, well, the fact of the matter is, there's been a lot of research done out there. From a lot of different groups, the Brennan Group, and we have access to all that information. To the extent there are issues that are peculiar to Texas, that's when we're going to have to rely upon David and his staff to maybe drill down and help us out a little bit. But I think I'm so delighted that we have 8 members of the legislature on the commission, because I think we get a pretty good idea from them what'll pass or might pass and what may not pass, or as Senator Huffman says, is dead. So we can be informed as we go along the process. A couple of housekeeping things. Tom Phillips talked about the rule of law. I'm a great believer that when you have a commission or a committee, you kind of have rules about how you proceed. And so that's why I sent out this operating rules and procedures. And if any of you have any concerns about any of that, I would really appreciate you letting me know. I personally want to flag one issue, and that is section 512. And section 512 on page 4 says, report. The commission shall adopt a final report by majority of vote of the members present. I really have misgivings about that. It seems, and so what I'd like to do is to kind of agree that we'll just revisit number 12 as we move through the process. Because frankly, if the senators or members of the House are somehow tied up on other matters, and at our meeting we have 4 people here, I don't want 4 people to determine what our report is. I want strength behind whatever our report is. So let's agree that subsection 512 we're going to hold in abeyance and decide later how we're going to decide to adopt the final report. Senator.
That's actually the issue I was going to talk about. And so all I can do is tell you, I can share with you some of the ways I've seen our committees do it in the Senate, and some of the special select committees is, like I'm sure of transportation, we've got a set of interim charges. We'll have all these hearings between now and, let's say, September or October, and then we put a report together. I've never seen anybody vote on those. Mm-hmm. But what you do is you've got members of the committee that sign it. And so then you put it together, you give everybody a copy of it. If anybody's got any issues with it, they tell you, and then you go in and, change whatever. But then you just send it around for their signatures. You don't always get all the signatures. Somebody doesn't like it, they don't have to sign it. That's kind of...
That may be a good way to approach it at the end of the day.
Sometimes if if another senator has an objection and you want to explain why you didn't sign it, then you can write a letter or a separate...
Yeah, I've talked at length with Scott Brister, former Justice of the Supreme Court. He chaired the Commission on School Finance. And in fact, some of these rules are very similar to the ones that he adopted for that commission. But interestingly enough, his commission used that exact language in terms of adopting the report. And I asked Scott, I said, Scott, he said, well, the fact of the matter is everybody showed up. So that was one byproduct of that. But
what statute say?
But in any event, let's just hold that.
What did the
part of
statute
basis.
say? Did it address it?
It doesn't say. It says we have to, by December 31, 2020, we have to commit to report to you.
Okay, perfect.
David, I'd like to add one other thing
Yeah,
to
Lynn.
that, and that is that it seems to me that if the legislature is charged, we would have to come up with 2/3 of the vote to approve any recommendation or make any either law or subject to a constitutional election, that I would like to at least also revisit the majority, because just as if our colleagues have to forge a 2/3 majority, it seems like to me that that's something we ought to consider too, not just who's present, but that the number of people that endorse our.
Well, I think that's a valid point. Let's hold that until we move along in the process. And we may decide that we want a 2/3 majority, we may decide something else. But I think that's a valid point. But that's what I'm talking about. Let's hold that as we move along. Another housekeeping, given the number of items the legislature has specifically instructed us to address, I have appointed 3 subcommittees. And I would apologize, or maybe not, to each member of the legislature, because I did not appoint any of you as chair, because I thought you had so much on your plate, I didn't want to add one more responsibility to it. So we've got a subcommittee on what I'm going to call elections, and let's hand these out so that everybody can see, which will be chaired by former Justice Tom Phillips. And then there's another one on appointments and confirmations, and former Chief Justice Wallace Jefferson will be chairing that. And then citizen panels and judicial qualifications, Lynn Liberato will be chairing that. And it also sets forth who the other members of each subcommittee are. So, and I tried to make it as balanced as I could so that you all could have input on all these various alternatives. And I thought it made sense, given the vast mandate that we have, that we work through these subcommittees, have the subcommittees report back to the main body, and then we can start addressing these one by one and see where that leads us. So if there's anybody who thinks, I don't want to be on this subcommittee, can you put me on another, just let me know. And we'll see what we can do. I just need to make sure it's balanced. In terms of next meetings, our next meeting is scheduled for February 7th, but that's not going to work. I understand this room is not available, and at least one other member of the commission had a problem on February 7th. The question I've got is the following week. Does anybody have any serious problem with, I think it's the week of February 9th. I think the 9th is a Sunday. So that'd be the 10th, 11th, 12th in there. Any time during that week that you cannot meet.
What week is it?
Monday's the 10th.
Yeah.
And Valentine's Day is the 14th.
Okay. I've been instructed the only date that's available here is the 11th, February 11th. Is February 11th available?
Not for me.
Not for me.
And I'm on 7 different committees.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was going to find a day where we can ever all be here.
I'll definitely on that.
Okay, why don't we do this? We'll poll the members of the commission to see what dates may work. I want to keep the momentum going, so I hate to leave 2 months between today and our March meeting. So we'll poll the members of the commission to see when in February a date might work. And I know everybody's got commitments, and so we want to try to get this in concrete as quickly as we can. Yeah, Tom.
We can, hopefully, the Supreme Court would give us the courtroom, or the legislature would give us.
We'll find a room. We'll find a room.
Yeah, we get a committee room.
We'll find a room when we find a day.
Okay. Any other items that the commission would like to bring up before we adjourn? Yes, Todd.
Now, just so we're clear, this committee is under open records and open meeting.
Excellent point. Let me tell you how we came out on that. I know that the Office of Court Administration, in particular, David, thinks that we're really not subject to the Open Meetings Act or Open Records Act. I've had some research done. I asked Chip Babcock if his firm would do some research. And frankly, I think there's an issue there about whether we are subject to it, but in any event, I want our meetings of the commission to be open. And now the subcommittees may be totally different. They could probably meet by themselves and without being on webcast and so on. But I want our commission meetings to be open because whatever we come up with, I don't want anybody claiming that somehow what we did was in a back room and so on and so forth. Let's be open about it.
Yeah, just add one more thing to that. So the reason why I was arguing separately is because, the judiciary is not subject to the same provisions as other entities are with regard to open meetings and public records. However, the judiciary does have its own public records provision, Rule 12 of the Rules of Judicial Administration, which basically function the same way. So to the degree that OCA as the administrative body supporting the commission has records, they will be subject to disclosure unless there's other exemptions, which are the ones you would be familiar with. So just be aware of that. And certainly the judiciary follows the requirements of posting meetings, this means being webcast to be archived. So the intent, I think, when we're talking with Mr. Beck, is to follow similar provisions. I just want to be clear that it's not the same typical Open Meetings Act, Public Information Act that you might be familiar with, but it does not mean that they won't be open and the records won't be available. So just want to be clear about that.
Okay. All right. Yes, sir.
Chairman Beck, I just want to express that timing is really important. And I think that having a governor who has served on the bench plays in our favor. At the same time, I think it's important that we keep in mind the political winds and all of the diversity that is now represented on the bench. And I think going back to something Senator Hopkins stated, we have to be very cognizant of the right of voters in this process, and maybe there is an opportunity to ensure that that diversity, whether politically, ethnically, gender, is still represented on the bench, whatever our recommendations are.
I think that's an excellent point. Excellent point, and I agree with you. All right, any other matters for the good of the cause, as they say? If not, we're adjourned. Thank you all so much.
See you on around.
Hey, Todd.